Hello, I'm Jackie Ganim-DeFalco, and welcome to this episode of Cape Ann ARTwaves. Cape Ann ARTwaves is hosted by 1623 Studios here in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and we are spending time with a wonderful group of artists here in Cape Ann from many different styles and genres. And today we have a special guest, Mr. Jeff Weaver, who is going to share his work that's spanned many decades. And afterward, you'll be able to see this on 1623 Studios on television, on YouTube, on Facebook, and many other media. So I'd like to introduce Jeff, who I've actually known for a long time, but I'm thrilled to be able to dig deeply into his story and learn more about how he got to where he is today. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Jackie for this wonderful invitation and opportunity to express a couple of ideas. Some are things that people have perhaps heard before. Maybe there's something new.
I agree, Jeff. I think that was one of the reasons I was looking forward to speaking with you, is that I think we all assume everybody knows you, but I still think there's some people that probably only met you at different intervals in your artistic career. So you can go back maybe back to 1972 or earlier, right? 1972 is when you came to Cape Ann, but you might want to even go before that.
Right. Well, I know one of the things you had asked me about had to do with my background. I delve into this a little bit, perhaps for the reason that I'll mention. A friend of mine saw one of my paintings somewhere, and he said, "Oh, that's a good painting, and it's by this fellow named Jeff Weaver. He was from out of town." Oh, and the person said, "Oh, you mean the guy that does the signs?" Well, the story goes something like that. So a lot of people knew me as the guy that did the signs or the murals in the restaurants and so forth, which is something I did for quite a few years. And so it's sort of like my artwork sort of came out of that. But let me back up to show that, well, I always had an interest in drawing and painting from the time I was a small child, as many artists do. And I was fairly proficient at it and skilled at it. And I would draw, but primarily I drew people. I would draw members of my family, and eventually I did portraits of people in the neighborhood and so forth. And then we came to Burlington in 1964, and I ended up going to high school in Burlington High School. My older brother, who was a senior, introduced me to another student by the name of Don Gorvette. Some people around town know Don Gorvette, and he was a senior, and he kind of took me into the world of his teacher, who was Eleanor Marvin. And Eleanor Marvin was an excellent art teacher. And so she was my art teacher for the 4 years of high school. And I mention that because that was probably the most substantial part of my education. You know, I came from suburbia. My parents didn't know really anything about museums and paintings and that sort of thing. But Eleanor introduced us to museums, to different artists, and I can still remember some of the work that she would show us. She would take us to, as I said, to the museums, and it introduced us to etching and so forth and so on. And with Don, I mentioned Don because he kind of took me under his wing in terms of his drawing and painting trips. So we would come to Gloucester, we would go to Newburyport, we would go into Boston. And I have paintings, things I did at the Boston waterfront in the 1960s. I think I have an etching that I did of the paint factory in 1967. So that goes way back.
That does go way back. That's terrific.
Yeah, so that's my first, I think that's the first thing, physical evidence I have that I actually was in Gloucester before 1967. But we used to come as kids, like a lot of people in Massachusetts, they came to Gloucester. So I was familiar with Gloucester.
Yeah.
And
but it got under your skin a little bit, huh? Did it get under your skin?
My skin was always a mysterious place.
Yeah.
You know, it was the end of that long, it seemed like every time I came to Gloucester, it was foggy and rainy.
Right.
And
well,
so that's what I thought Gloucester was. I thought it was a foggy, rainy place. But the sun also comes out here sometimes too. But
that's great.
So then I ended up at the museum school. Eleanor was also a student there, and she, you know, kind of fostered my interest. But she was very good at bringing out the best of a person. And so then I moved to Gloucester at that time. As soon as I got out of high school, I and that's the next spring I moved to Gloucester with Don and his brother and some other fellow students. There was a lot of art students from Boston in Gloucester at that time. There were a number of music school students. I think there were in the building at the fort where we lived on the corner, number 2 Beach Court. I think there were 7 of us in those 2 apartments.
Wow.
Oh, and then on the 3rd floor was another guy from the museum school, John Batten. So the whole building was full of museum school students.
What's in that building now, Jeff?
It's where the dentist is. It's on the corner
Okay.
of Beach Court and Commercial Street.
Right.
Yeah. When we were there, it was an old house
Mm.
and a big 3-story building. And on the 1st floor was Parisi Fishing Gear.
Excellent.
Dan Parisi's still around. He's down the fort still. But what a place, what an environment to spend time in. We ended up spending so much time drawing and painting on the waterfront. I befriended some of these, the fishermen, of course. And I did a lot of work for the fishing boats. I would paint pictures on the pilot house. A couple of them I still have. I did the Linda B. I did some bears for Mr. Testaverde, a big bear with 4 little cubs representing a sun, like that. The sea fox, big fox with a fish in his mouth, and that sort of thing, to make it neat. The sign, now you asked me about the sign painting thing.
Yes, I did.
Came into the picture because we did anything you could do to, make a few dollars, even though the rents were like $45 a month or something. But I worked at the Hawthorne Inn as a summer job, the old Hawthorne Inn, which also no longer exists. And the owner of the Hawthorne Inn knew Tony Polsonetti, who opened the Tony's Fruitland, which is now where Mike's Sub Shop is on Railroad Avenue.
Okay.
So he had a big truck, and so all of us collaborated to paint like a huge mural on the side of this big truck that he used for delivering the fruit all over the place. So that kind of opened up the world of the sign painting. So from there on, I'd never done a sign in my life, and it was anathema is what I'm trying to say to me.
Yeah.
Like something when I would see people do lettering, I would think, how could you ever do that? But one thing led to another. I ended up doing it, and I did them for everybody. Virgilio.
So this is a fruit truck. It all started on the side of a fruit truck.
It all started with the Tony's and fruit truck. It was quite a thing. There was an article in the newspaper. It was a huge colored cornucopia of fruit with fruit coming out of it, sitting on the breakwater with boats in the background. It was a big wild thing. Because Dawn and myself had done a lot of set design in high school because they people that had done plays in the town. So we did Guys and Dolls, and we did Brigadoon, and we did ships for King and I and all this stuff. So it was cool that we would do this big mural on the side of the truck. At any rate, then I ended up doing this A&M trading for Tom Malloy and East Gloucester and Gordon King and a lot of these different jobs I did like that. And as I said, one thing led to another, and next thing I knew, I did signs and murals for 25 years or something, right?
Wow.
Some are still around, but then it's probably going back 20 years or so that I got back to the artwork. Let's get to that.
Let's move forward.
I was able to make that transition back to doing the art work full time, or at least for a living, I would say. Let's go to question 4.
Yes, let's move on. I think I specifically am interested in, you were already working outside, I guess, so you're doing sign paintings, and obviously people know you as being outside painting. I think you've become your own icon in Cape Ann. And you've described your work, or others have anyway, as enchanting realism. Which of course is a particular style, and I'd love to know more about, with all the different influences you've had, how you sort of landed on that as your own, as your direction that you wanted to take as an artist, because you certainly had a lot of options.
Well, that's a good question. I think. Well, going back to the past, I was introduced, as I said, I earlier had always been interested in doing people in the figure. And when museum school, basically all I did was the figure, oddly enough.
Wow.
Gloucester, I began to, and Dawn kind of introduced me. I think when we took these painting trips into Boston, Gloucester, etc., as I mentioned, I kind of get introduced to the world of on-site. We use the term on-site. People say plein air.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was introduced to that. And when I was living in Gloucester, it seemed to me what I wanted to do. I think that's what inspired me as I walked along the waterfront and saw the boats and so forth.
Yeah.
So it was a period of a transition. I had to kind of learn how to paint what would be called landscape. It's not landscape per se, it's more seascape or marine paintings or whatever it might be called. But it's sort of something I had to kind of learn over time. And I would say that within the last number of years, it seems to be most what inspires me is representing the world that I live in. So I'm living in this environment. I'm seeing buildings, I'm seeing streets, I'm seeing telephone poles. You know, when you combine that sentiment of having some type of a feeling, it's not that I'm going to try to describe what it is because it's kind of indescribable. And you combine that with the visual things that you learn about color, you learn about shapes, you learn about line, those abstract things. So when you combine the sentimental part of it, the feeling of a place where you live, and combine that, you have to combine it with the visual elements because you're actually doing a picture. And at the end of the day, it's a visual form of communication. So to me, the communication, I think I'm communicating on those two levels in terms of there is a sentiment and people feel that, as you said, it's some charming thing or something. There's a sentimental aspect to it, a feeling aspect to it, as well as, to me, there has to be a strong graphic. And I'm drawn, when I do a subject, I'm drawn to the graphic elements. I'm drawn to the page, I'm drawn to the geometry.
Yeah.
And the more I work at this, earlier on, yes, I would do a lighthouse or a Thatcher Island, something that's very recognizable. But the more I work at this, the subject matter is changing, and there is a high degree of realism still, but I'm drawn more to the geometry and in lights and darks, and I think as you work at this line of work, hopefully as time goes along, you discover what it is that you do best. What is it that you're trying to do?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to not just be, I don't want to be a picture maker. Painting is about ideas, ideas of things that are not necessarily representational. They're about color. They're about shapes. And this is what holds the attention of the viewer so that they look a little more deeply.
Your work is very powerful, Jeff. There's no doubt about it. All the sentiment and everything you're talking about, my perspective, can be seen in every piece. I mean, you draw people in, and also you're capturing our history also. I mean, you're capturing the feeling of the time, and makes it very special and recognizable.
Yeah, I do have a sentiment about that. I do have a feeling about that, that that you're looking at the certain period of time. And I don't want to be a throwback. I don't have an interest in, I'm going to paint like the people painted in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Some people, you could make a correlation between what I do and what people did 50 years ago. But I'm not intentionally trying to do that. It may be that the way I use the paint, it's at some point, or it may be some way, some subject matter that I choose. But I have no in going back in the time machine. Yeah. But I do see Gloucester has an interesting, it sort of does tell that story about its past, and that's a little different. Yeah. So what I do is I sort of paint, one thing I think I kind of do is that it represents the layers. Yeah. I'm interested in the modern. I'm interested in what it looks like right now, because I think even what it looks like, what things look like right now, that's important to me because I'm painting my time. I'm painting the world that I live in. I'm not painting the world that I would have lived in if I lived here 50 years ago. Right. So that kind of resonates with me. For whatever it might sound corny or it might sound odd or something, but that's I
think you're right. I mean, you're speaking your paintings as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I'm feeling it, I'm seeing it as you're talking. It's all making a lot of sense to me.
Oh, good.
I want to change direction because we are
Yes.
sort of limited on time. And
Right.
I'm really interested in whether you've ever pivoted or gone out of your comfort zone, your realm, not just in terms of subject matter or style, but even geography, because I'm not sure I've seen anything from you that's from even another area outside of Cape Ann, but that
Right.
might just be me. So
Right. My light went off, so
I noticed that. Yeah, we lost your light.
okay. So as long as you can still hear me.
I can still hear you. I
And
don't know if you
kind
can
of.
add any
Yeah. So,
light there.
no, I would say what in terms of geography, yes. So when I travel, I do bring my stuff with me. You know, in Holland, Italy, wherever it is. I have done some fine things in some of these other places, things that have attracted me. If I'm in it, I end up at the train station.
Right.
I go overhead or something.
Yeah.
You know, I've done a good deal of work in Boston, Chelsea. Chelsea, I love East Boston. They're
Okay.
attracted to me because they're heavy duty industrial Americana stuff, and I like that. I'm drawn to that. You know, how far outside my bubble I go. I would say this to that in terms of stylistically, or, you know, some people have asked me, why don't I paint simply abstractly? I do feel drawn to this. I think the subject matter, again, it goes back to the communication idea. I do have something I'm trying to communicate. I wouldn't be able to communicate that with pure abstraction. You know, it's like a seesaw to me a little bit. You have the subject matter, which is the main idea, and then you have these more abstract elements of color and so forth, which are on the other end of the spectrum. So where are you in between? You know, to me, the abstract things, the interpretation of a subject is very important, but the subject itself is also part of what my idea is.
Right.
And that
Right.
So, you know, how much I'm going to pivot, too much, probably not 90 degrees, you know, but I keep developing some of these ideas which are a little bit outside of the bubble.
Right. Right.
The
Well,
bubble,
that's, I mean,
outside, they're really purely representational ideas.
Right. I've got you. Well, no, I mean, you've really been true to yourself, which is why I had to ask the question. You know, you have kind of your true north, I think, in your painting that comes through. And,
I think that's the way I look at things.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have a very interesting question here about, tell me your next question.
Oh, it's about the people that you've interacted with, your patrons over the years, because to me, your work appeals to such a wide number of people. I mean, you know, I could be in the fishing community, I could be an art collector, I could be a museum, or just somebody like me who just loves all types of art. And I feel like you have a very wide appeal. And I'm always interested in, you know, who are your patrons? You know, what are they like? What are some of your favorite stories even about working with collectors of your work over the years? You know, I mean, this is a long conversation, but, you know, just some things that might come top of mind.
It is a very broad, it is a very broad spectrum. And the work that I do, fortunately for me, in terms of, you know, making a living at this is what I'm living at, is that it does span the spectrum of people who are serious art collector people. As a gentleman that collects America, you know, John Sloan in the 1930s, Ashcan School type work, who's also who has responded to my work for, you know, apparent obvious reasons. It's also it has appealed to people who are just people who live in Gloucester. Of course, for them, oftentimes what they're reacting to something that they know. You know, they know the place. They know that house. They know that street. That's what resonates with them. Some other people, they don't know where it is. It doesn't really matter to them, but they react to some other elements of the thing. So it's a very broad thing. But I just a thought that I had jotted down here is interesting. Sometimes I've had to really push the subject matter idea. So sometimes I do a subject that I don't know if it's going to work. When you asked, one of the questions has to do with things that are challenging.
Yes, yes.
I'm always, at this point, it's all challenging for me. It's all,
Mm.
I would not go out and do something if I thought, well, this is a no-brainer. This is going to be so easy and everybody will love it. I don't do that. I don't have an interest in that. I'm always trying to challenge myself in some way. But I did a painting that was just a wall. But it was, I loved the color of it because a building that had fallen into the ocean. So it left what was behind it. It had all these textures of different colors of green. And it was, and with some shadows, a concrete block building. And it was just fascinating, all those textures, shadows and so on. But I don't know if anyone will respond the way I do to it.
Yeah.
But I remember somebody said something to me a long time ago, if you respond to it, if you're drawn to this, whatever it is that draws you, someone else will also. So that, to me, that's enough. All I need is one other person to feel the same way.
That's great.
So I went ahead and did it, and it was quite attractive to people. People really responded to it, and partly maybe because it was different. It was the world that they, the cliche thing. It's the world that they see every day.
Yes.
But wow, all of a sudden I see it now. I never saw it before, and I think that's a lot of what the artists can do. Potentially help people to see the world they're used to in a new way, in a nice way, in a colorful way, or whatever it might be. So I think that to me gives the satisfaction.
So here's a good segue. That's a good segue, Jeff, to, excuse my voice, to our last question, which is really that this is a time when certainly seeing the world in a different way, in a softer way, in a more colorful way, is probably more important than ever. And the art world has been incredibly challenged during this time of the pandemic, for sure. And, I think all of us have had to really dig, deep inside to see how we were going to get through this. And so I'm interested in how you've kind of faced this time. I mean, obviously, a lot of our studios were shut down, and events were shut down, and openings were shut down. And yet, a lot of people have emerged in a good way from an artistic standpoint. So I'd love to have your perspective on that.
Well, I won't say anything too profound here, probably, because I've simply gone about my business. And in that, I am able to just go out and paint. I'm not, in contact with anybody. Pretty easy to keep my social distancing out there. So I've pretty well kept up my work as I ordinarily would. The studio, of course, has been closed up until recently. So, but that's okay. But interestingly, the only thing I could think of related to how it has affected me is that I did some work in Boston, and there's no traffic. When in the month of April, I thought, oh my goodness, I used to have to leave the city at 3.
Yeah.
Now, at least at that time, now it's kind of gone back to normal again. A little bit of traffic, not like it used to be, but so that's been a plus. But no, I kind of, aside from all the other ramifications that it's brought, the COVID-19, I would simply say that for me personally in my work, I'm able to go about my business.
Right. And you have your gallery downtown, and I know you're predominantly open on Saturdays. Are you open
on Saturdays? I'm a one-man band.
Yeah.
So, I like to be out. I myself, and I force myself. I'm like a little child in some ways. When the sun is out, I can't stand to be in the house.
I know. I lucked out. Today's a foggy
day. I want to be out playing.
Are there any other places we can find your work beside online and in your gallery?
I do show at North Shore Arts Association and Rock Association. Right now, it's a little tougher over there, but
but not other galleries.
No, I don't. Yeah. I don't do galleries. Okay. I have in the past, and I permit, and I just keep my life very simple. I paint pictures on the wall. People come in. Hopefully, they react to them positively.
That's great, Jeff. Well, this has really been such a pleasure, and I loved hearing your story. And I'm sure that many other people will have heard this story for the first time when they hear this.
Oh, good.
So it's very exciting. And we'll be sharing some of your early work, in this video, and some of your current work in the video. And everybody can find you at jeffweaver.com, correct?
jeffweaverfineart.com.
JeffWeaverFineArt.com. Okay, JeffWeaverFineArt.com. I just wanted to make sure we got the right, and that will also show at the end of the video. So I'm going to wrap up now and thank everybody for, thank Jeff for his time today. Thank 1623 Studios, and ask our audience to please look out for the video when it comes out, and to share it. It'll be on YouTube, it'll be on Facebook, it'll be promoted on all other social media channels, and get it out there beyond Cape Ann. The next episode after this will be hosted by my co-host, Christine Fisher, and we'll continue to share in this fantastic opportunity to interview artists on Cape Ann. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.